The fluorescent lights of the corner store buzz overhead as I scan the shelves for something quick to eat after a 12-hour shift at the hospital. My scrubs still smell faintly of antiseptic, and my feet ache with that bone-deep exhaustion only pediatric nurses understand. I reach for a pre-made sandwich when the bell above the door chimes. 3 men burst inside. Ski masks. Guns. The world tilts sideways into a nightmare I have seen on the news but never imagined living through. The lead man shouts for everyone on the ground and my knees hit the dirty linoleum before my brain fully processes the command. There are maybe 6 other people in the store. An elderly man near the register, a teenager by the drinks, a woman with a baby. The baby. He is crying now, high-pitched wails of terror that pierce through the shouting. The woman holding him is shaking so violently, I can see it from 10 feet away. One of the robbers waves his gun at her and screams for the noise to stop. The woman looks around wildly and her eyes lock on mine. She stumbles toward me, and suddenly the baby is being thrust into my arms, heavy and warm and screaming. The woman runs, just bolts for the back exit before I can say a word. The weight of this child settles against my chest, and every instinct I have honed over 6 years of nursing kicks in. I curl around him automatically, making my body a shield. The robber at the register is screaming at the owner to open the cash drawer. There is the sharp crack of a gunshot and my ears ring. The owner crumples. Blood spreads across the floor in a dark pool. I press the baby's face into my shoulder and hum, a tuneless, desperate sound meant to soothe him or maybe myself. His cries soften to hiccuping sobs. I notice things in fragments. His clothing is expensive, soft cotton with a designer label visible at the collar. The blanket wrapped around him is hand-knitted, intricate, and clearly made with love. There is a birthmark on his neck, a small port wine stain shaped like a crescent moon. He cannot be more than 5 or 6 months old. Sirens wail in the distance, growing louder. The robbers panic. They grab the cash and run, leaving chaos behind. I stay on the floor holding this stranger's child until police flood inside. An officer helps me up and my legs shake. I give my statement in halting sentences while the baby clings to my scrubs with tiny fists. They ask about the woman who had him. I describe her, but realize I remember almost nothing useful. Brown hair, average height, panic in her eyes. She never comes back. Not while the paramedics work on the owner, not while detectives arrive, not while 30 minutes stretch into an hour. A social worker appears and reaches for the baby. He screams and buries his face against me. I hear myself telling her no. Not yet. Not until he calms down. I cannot explain the fierce protectiveness rising in me for this child I do not know. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. Alexander Darcy is in a meeting with representatives from 2 families when James Fitzwilliam enters without knocking. A breach of protocol so severe that every man in the room tenses. James never interrupts unless the world is ending. Alexander reads the urgency in his second-in-command's eyes and dismisses the room with a single gesture. They file out quickly. James closes the door and crosses the office in 3 strides, tablet already extended. His voice is carefully controlled, but Alexander hears the tremor beneath. They may have found Tommy. The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. For 3 weeks he has lived in a nightmare, where every lead turned cold, and every hour that passed made recovery less likely. His sister Catherine is dead, murdered in her own home while trying to protect her son. Tommy was gone when Alexander's men arrived, stolen by enemies who wanted to destroy what little family Alexander had left. He has mobilized every resource, called in every favor, and unleashed violence on anyone who might have information. Nothing worked. Until now. James plays security footage from a corner store robbery across town. Alexander watches the timestamp. 2 hours ago. The angle shows customers on the floor, armed men at the register. Then a woman comes into frame. She is small, dark-haired, wearing scrubs that mark her as medical staff. Someone thrusts a baby into her arms and runs. Alexander's breath stops. He watches this stranger curl her body around the infant without hesitation when gunfire erupts. She makes herself a shield. The robbers flee and she stays on the ground, rocking the baby with such tenderness that something in Alexander's chest cracks. James zooms the image. Alexander sees it, the birthmark on the baby's neck, crescent-shaped, port wine stain, Tommy, his nephew, alive. The blanket wrapped around the child is unmistakable too. Catherine knitted it herself during her pregnancy, pale blue with white stars. Alexander has not allowed himself to hope for weeks, but now it floods through him with painful intensity. He demands to know everything. James explains the woman gave a statement to police. Eleanor Whitmore, age 28, pediatric nurse at Mercy General. She refused to let Child Services take Tommy and is still at the precinct with him. The child will not let her go. Alexander watches the footage again, studying Eleanor's face. She looks exhausted and terrified, but her hands on Tommy are steady and sure. She checks him over with professional efficiency. She speaks to him in what must be soothing tones, though there is no audio. Tommy calms in her arms. This stranger protected his nephew without knowing who the baby was or what dangers surrounded him. Alexander feels gratitude so fierce it nearly chokes him. He also feels something else: attraction, dangerous and unwelcome. He orders James to find Eleanor Whitmore immediately but discreetly. He wants eyes on her and Tommy every second. He wants her background checked. He wants to know if she can be trusted, or if this is somehow another trap. Then Alexander stands and reaches for his suit jacket. James asks where he is going. Alexander's voice is granite and absolute certainty: to bring his nephew home. Eleanor manages to convince the social worker at the precinct that her nursing credentials and immediate bond with the baby make her a suitable emergency foster placement until the absent mother can be located. The paperwork takes another hour, and by the time she walks out of the station with Tommy drowsy in a borrowed car seat, her entire body feels like it might collapse. She calls Sarah from the taxi and tries to explain that she is bringing home a baby, an actual infant, and her roommate's shock comes through the phone in sputtering questions Eleanor cannot fully answer. The apartment looks smaller when she enters with the car seat hooked over her arm and a plastic bag of donated supplies from the hospital nursery. Sarah stands in the kitchen with wide eyes and her mouth open as Eleanor sets the car seat on their second-hand couch. "He is beautiful," Sarah whispers, and Eleanor feels the inexplicable surge of protectiveness rise again. She lifts Tommy out and he settles against her shoulder with a contented sigh that makes her heart twist. Sarah asks the obvious questions about what happens next, and Eleanor admits she has no idea, but she could not let him disappear into the foster system scared and alone. Not when he clung to her like she was his only safety. Sarah nods slowly and offers to run to the store for proper formula and diapers. Eleanor accepts gratefully, and once her roommate leaves, she carries Tommy to her small bedroom. She lays him on her bed surrounded by pillows and examines him with professional thoroughness. He is healthy overall but thinner than he should be, and there is a faint bruise on his arm that makes her stomach clench. Someone has not been caring for him properly. His eyes follow her movements with an awareness that seems too sharp for an infant, and when she runs her finger along his palm, his grip is strong. The expensive clothing and hand-knitted blanket speak of a family with resources and love, yet he was handed off to a stranger by a panicked woman who never returned. Nothing about this makes sense. Eleanor changes him into a too-large onesie Sarah kept from her nephew's visit last year and wraps him back in the beautiful blanket. She sits in the rocking chair her landlord left behind and feeds him a bottle while humming softly. Tommy drinks eagerly, and his eyes drift closed. She should feel afraid or overwhelmed, but instead, she feels purpose. This is what she is meant to do: protect children. That night after Sarah returns, and they establish a makeshift nursery corner in Eleanor's room, she rocks Tommy to sleep. The apartment buzzer sounds harsh and unexpected. She ignores it. It rings again with insistent pressure. Annoyed and uneasy, she shifts Tommy into the bassinet Sarah borrowed from a neighbor and moves to the intercom. The security camera feed shows the street below. An expensive black car idles at the curb, and a man in a tailored suit stands at her building entrance. Her stomach drops. Everything about him radiates danger and power. He looks up at the camera as if he knows exactly where it is and that she is watching. His face is all sharp angles and cold control, devastatingly handsome, absolutely terrifying. Her hands shake as she reaches for her phone. Alexander Darcy stands on the cracked sidewalk outside Eleanor Whitmore's building and catalogs every detail with the automatic assessment that has kept him alive in a world where hesitation means death. The neighborhood is working class, the kind of area where people keep their heads down and their curtains drawn when expensive cars idle too long at the curb. Street lamps flicker with unreliable light. The building itself is old brick, fire escapes clinging to its facade like metal veins, and he counts the windows up to the third floor, where his men confirmed she lives in apartment 3B. James stands beside the car, one hand resting near the weapon concealed beneath his jacket, and his voice comes through the earpiece low and cautious. They should wait, gather more information, ensure this is not a trap. But Alexander cannot wait another minute knowing his nephew is inside, so close after 3 weeks of hell. He presses the buzzer for 3B and waits. Nothing. He presses again, longer this time, and finally the intercom crackles to life. The voice that emerges is female, shaky, but trying for firmness. Who is this? Alexander considers lying, using a cover story, playing this safe, but something about the way this woman protected Tommy in that security footage makes him choose a different path. Honesty. Dangerous and rare in his world. He tells her his name is Alexander Darcy, and the baby she is holding is his nephew. The silence that follows stretches so long he thinks she has fled, but then her voice returns, and the shakiness has transformed into something colder. She knows his name. Of course she does. Everyone in this city knows the Darcy name, knows what it means, knows to fear it. She tells him to leave or she will call the police, and Alexander feels frustration rise alongside grudging respect. He keeps his voice level and states a simple truth. The police cannot help her, and he is not leaving without Tommy. Another silence. He imagines her inside, weighing options, looking at the baby she protected without knowing his value. He decides to give her a reason to trust him when trust should be impossible. His voice softens in a way that would shock anyone who knows him, and he begins to speak about Catherine, his sister, Tommy's mother. He describes her dark hair that curled when it rained, her laugh that sounded like bells, her stubborn determination to build a life outside the family business. He tells this stranger how Catherine died 3 weeks ago, murdered in her home, and how Tommy vanished that same night. He does not hide the grief that roughens his voice into gravel and broken edges. He lets her hear his pain because it is the only currency he has that might reach her. The intercom stays silent, but he knows she is listening. He can feel her on the other side of this fragile connection, deciding whether the monster at her door might also be an uncle desperate to save the last piece of his family. Eleanor stands in her small living room with her phone clutched in one hand and her heart hammering against her ribs as she makes a decision that terrifies her down to her bones. She presses the intercom button and tells Alexander Darcy he can come up but only with proof of identity and relationship to the baby, and her voice sounds steadier than she feels. She immediately calls Sarah and leaves an urgent message telling her roommate to come home now, right now, and to stay in her bedroom no matter what she hears. Tommy sleeps peacefully in the borrowed bassinet, unaware that his entire world is about to shift again, and Eleanor positions herself between him and the door as she waits. The knock comes exactly 3 minutes later, controlled and firm, and when she opens the door, the man who enters seems to fill her entire apartment with his presence, in a way that has nothing to do with physical size, though he is tall and broad-shouldered. Alexander Darcy looks like violence wrapped in expensive tailoring, all sharp angles and cold control, but his eyes go immediately to the bassinet, and the expression that crosses his face is naked longing and relief so profound it makes Eleanor's chest ache. He moves toward Tommy, and she steps between them on instinct, her body a barrier, and he stops immediately. His gaze shifts to her, and she sees him truly assessing her for the first time. This small woman in worn scrubs who dares to stand between a predator and what he considers his. He reaches slowly into his jacket, and Eleanor's breath catches, but he withdraws only a phone and a leather wallet. He shows her photos, his fingers steady as he swipes through images of a beautiful dark-haired woman holding a newborn baby wrapped in the same hand-knitted blanket that currently covers Tommy. The woman has Alexander's eyes and her smile is sunlight. He shows Eleanor legal documents on his phone, guardianship papers signed by Catherine Elizabeth Darcy, naming her brother Alexander James Darcy as Tommy's guardian in the event of her death, and the date on the documents is 4 months old. Eleanor's nursing training helps her read people, helps her see past surfaces to the truth beneath, and what she sees in Alexander Darcy's rigidly controlled exterior is genuine emotion barely leashed. She asks the question she needs answered, her voice quiet but clear. "What happened to your sister?" Alexander's jaw tightens, and for a moment she thinks he will not answer, but then words emerge rough as gravel and edged with grief that sounds like it might cut him from the inside out. He tells her Catherine was murdered in her home 3 weeks ago and Tommy was taken from the scene, and someone used her baby as a weapon or a bargaining chip or a punishment, and every day since has been a waking nightmare of searching and finding nothing. His voice cracks on the last word, and Eleanor sees the fissure in his armor, the wound that has not stopped bleeding, and despite every warning screaming in her mind, she believes him. Eleanor's heart aches for this dangerous man's loss, even as her mind screams warnings about standing in her apartment with a known crime lord who commands fear and violence the way other men command boardrooms. She hears herself ask the question that matters most, her voice steadier than her hands. Why would someone take Tommy? Alexander's expression shifts into something harder and colder, the grief replaced by calculation and controlled fury, and he hesitates before answering as if weighing how much truth to give her. Finally he speaks, and tells her his world has enemies, rival families who see weakness as opportunity and leverage as currency. He believes they took Tommy to punish him, or force concessions, or simply because cruelty is the language spoken in the shadows where he conducts his business. Eleanor feels the floor tilt beneath her as she realizes she is holding a child caught in a criminal war, an innocent used as a weapon between predators, and every instinct she has tells her to give Tommy to Alexander immediately and walk away from this danger before it consumes her too. Instead, she finds herself asking a different question, the only one that truly matters. Will Tommy be safe with you? Alexander meets her eyes, and she sees him decide to give her absolute honesty in this moment when lies would be easier. He promises on Catherine's grave that he will die before letting anyone harm Tommy again, and the conviction in his voice is not bravado, but bedrock certainty, the kind of vow that costs something to make. Eleanor feels that promise settle into her bones and shake loose something she thought she had buried years ago in foster homes where promises meant nothing. She takes a breath and tells him he can hold Tommy, but she is not releasing custody until she is certain of his safety, and the words hang in the air between them like a challenge. Alexander stares at her, and she watches shock flicker across his features before it disappears behind his mask of control. No one challenges him. She can see that truth written in his posture and the dangerous stillness that overtakes him. Yet here she stands, this small woman in worn scrubs, with no power and no protection, negotiating terms with a man who could make her disappear with a phone call. He finds himself respecting her audacity, even as frustration rises hot in his chest because time is not their ally, and every moment Tommy remains in unofficial custody is a moment complications can multiply. James's voice comes through the earpiece urgent and clipped with warning. Police are running searches on Tommy's status, and Child Services has flagged the case for follow-up in the morning, and they need to move now before bureaucracy and law enforcement tangle this into knots that even Alexander's lawyers will take days to cut through. Alexander keeps his eyes on Eleanor and sees her chin lift in stubborn determination and realizes this woman will not be bullied or threatened into compliance, that the same fierce protectiveness that made her shield a stranger's baby with her own body now makes her unmovable as stone. Alexander tells Eleanor they need to move quickly, and his voice carries the weight of urgency that makes her pulse spike because time is not their ally in this moment. Child Services and police will complicate custody in the morning when his legal claim is ironclad but tied to his reputation, and bureaucracy does not move at the speed of family loyalty or desperation. Eleanor realizes she is in over her head, standing in her tiny apartment negotiating with a crime lord while a stolen baby sleeps in a borrowed bassinet. And the rational part of her mind screams that she should walk away now before she drowns in waters too deep and dangerous to navigate. But she looks at Tommy and knows she cannot abandon him now, cannot hand him over and disappear back into her small, safe life, pretending this night never happened. Alexander watches her internal war play across her face and offers a solution that makes her heart race and her breath catch. Come with Tommy to his home until the legal paperwork is processed and finalized. She will see with her own eyes that he is safe and can verify the environment herself, and if she finds it lacking, she can involve the authorities then with clear conscience. Eleanor knows this is insane, absolute madness to even consider going to a crime lord's house, entering his territory where his power is absolute and her safety is whatever he decides it will be. Yet Tommy stirs in his bassinet and makes a small sound, and Alexander moves closer on instinct, and the baby's eyes open and focus on the man looming above him. Tommy reaches up with one small hand and coos, a sound of recognition and want. And Eleanor watches the infant she has protected with such fierce determination reach for Alexander like he knows him, like some deep memory recognizes family. That decides her. The baby knows him. Tommy is not afraid. She hears herself agree, but her voice is steady as she sets her terms. Sarah must know where she is going and must have the address. She keeps her phone on her at all times. If she calls for help, someone will come. Alexander agrees without hesitation, and something like a smile ghosts across his hard features. Not quite humor, but close to it, like he finds her precautions simultaneously futile and admirable. He tells her with devastating honesty that those precautions will not help her if he wanted to cause her harm, but he admires her for trying, for negotiating terms even when she has no leverage and no power. James appears in her doorway without her hearing him arrive, and it makes her jump because men that large should not move like shadows. He takes in the scene and nods once at Alexander, some unspoken communication passing between them. Within 20 minutes, Eleanor finds herself in organized chaos as her few belongings for Tommy are gathered, the borrowed car seat secured, and she is walking down her own stairs, feeling like she is stepping off a cliff into empty air. The luxury SUV waiting at the curb looks like it costs more than she makes in 5 years, all black paint and tinted windows and menace. Alexander opens the back door himself, and Eleanor climbs in with Tommy's carrier, her hands trembling as she secures it. Alexander slides in beside her, too close in the confined space, and the door closes with a solid sound like a vault ceiling. The vehicle pulls away from her building, and Eleanor watches her modest neighborhood disappear behind them as they drive into the night toward an unknown fate, and she wonders if she has just made the bravest or most foolish decision of her entire life. Alexander's estate stuns Eleanor into silence the moment the SUV passes through iron gates that swing open like jaws, and then close behind them with mechanical finality that makes her pulse spike because there is no casual exit from this place. The drive winds through sprawling grounds lit by subtle landscape lighting that reveals manicured gardens and stone fountains and security personnel stationed at intervals like chess pieces positioned for defense. The house itself rises from the darkness like something from another world, all stone and glass and architectural lines that speak of wealth so far beyond her understanding that she cannot find words for the distance between her modest apartment and this sprawling monument to power. Alexander watches her reaction with unreadable eyes as the vehicle stops before wide steps leading to double doors that open before they even exit, staff appearing like they have been waiting for his return. Eleanor fumbles with Tommy's car seat, and Alexander reaches over to help, his hands brushing hers, and the touch sends electricity up her arms that she tries to ignore as they walk toward the entrance together. Inside the foyer, her breath catches because the space is larger than her entire apartment, all marble floors and soaring ceilings, and a chandelier that probably costs more than she will earn in her lifetime. Staff greet Alexander with respect that borders on reverence, calling him sir and stepping back to give him space like he is royalty and they are subjects who know their place in the hierarchy. He does not introduce her, and she realizes she is an unknown variable in his household, a stranger brought into the inner sanctum without explanation. Alexander leads her deeper into the house, past rooms filled with expensive furniture and art that looks museum quality, and she follows with Tommy's carrier growing heavy in her grip, and her heart hammering because she has crossed into territory where normal rules do not apply. He stops before a door on the second floor and opens it, and Eleanor steps inside and feels her throat go tight with unexpected emotion. The nursery is perfect, every detail considered and executed with care that speaks of love rather than money. The walls are painted a soft gray with white trim, and there is a crib made of dark wood with bedding in cream and sage green, a changing table stocked with supplies, a rocking chair positioned near the window, shelves filled with books and toys. But what breaks something open in her chest are the photographs covering one wall, dozens of images of a beautiful dark-haired woman holding a tiny infant, smiling with fierce joy and exhaustion and love. Catherine. Alexander stands behind her, and his voice is rough when he explains that he kept the nursery ready, that he refused to let hope die even when weeks passed without word, that every day he walked past this door and promised his sister he would bring her son home. His vulnerability in this moment cracks through Eleanor's defenses like a hammer through ice, because this is not the crime lord who commands fear, but a man drowning in grief and clinging to the only family he has left. Tommy wakes and begins to fuss, the small sounds cutting through the heavy atmosphere. Eleanor moves on instinct born from training and genuine affection, lifting him from the carrier and moving to the changing table where she finds everything she needs organized with precision. Alexander watches from the doorway as she changes Tommy's diaper, and then settles into the rocking chair to feed him the bottle she prepared before they left her apartment. His gaze is hungry, but not in any way that threatens her. Instead, it is longing so profound she can feel it across the space between them. She realizes with sudden clarity that he is afraid to hold his nephew, afraid of breaking down or being inadequate or shattering the control he maintains like armor. Eleanor looks up and meets his eyes and offers without words, holding Tommy out toward him in invitation. Alexander approaches slowly, and his hands are gentle despite their size as he takes the baby, cradling him against his broad chest with surprising care. Tommy settles immediately like he knows this scent and this heartbeat from before the nightmare began. Alexander's eyes close, and Eleanor sees a single tear escape to track down his hard face, and she looks away deliberately, giving him privacy for his reunion with the child he thought might be lost forever. The moment stretches tender and raw until footsteps sound in the hallway, and James appears in the doorway and freezes as he takes in the intimate scene, his expression shifting into something complicated that Eleanor cannot fully read. James is suspicious of Eleanor's motives and protective of Alexander in the way only a second in command can be. the kind of loyalty forged through years of violence and survival and trust earned in blood. And Eleanor sees it written clearly across his hard features as he watches the tender scene in the nursery with obvious discomfort and calculation. He clears his throat, and Alexander looks up from Tommy with reluctance, the mask sliding back into place as he becomes once again the crime lord rather than the grieving uncle. And he hands the baby back to Eleanor with careful gentleness before following James into the hallway where their voices drop to urgent murmurs. Eleanor does not mean to eavesdrop, but sound carries in the quiet house, and she catches fragments that make her stomach clench with anxiety and something that feels uncomfortably like hurt. James questions her presence and her timing, his voice sharp with skepticism as he suggests she could be a plant from the Lennox family or an opportunist who recognized an opportunity when she saw expensive baby clothes and a chance at leverage. Alexander's response is swift and hard-edged, his tone brooking no argument as he describes how she protected Tommy during the robbery without knowing who the child was or what he might be worth, how she shielded him with her own body when bullets could have flown, how she refused to surrender him to authorities even when it would have been easier and safer. James counters that coincidences in their world are usually carefully constructed traps, and they cannot afford to trust blindly, not with Tommy's life at stake, not when Catherine's blood is barely cold and her killers are still drawing breath somewhere in the city. Alexander's silence stretches long enough that Eleanor knows he is considering the validity of his friend's concerns, and when he speaks again, his voice carries the weight of command as he tells James to run a complete background check, everything they can find, financials and associations, and history going back to childhood. Eleanor hears James agree and footsteps retreating down the hallway, and she stands frozen in the nursery with Tommy drowsy in her arms and the sting of distrust sharp in her chest, even though she understands it, even though in their position she would demand the same precautions. In this world, trust is currency more valuable than gold, and she is a stranger who appeared at the perfect moment to insert herself into Alexander's life and his vulnerability. It stings, but she cannot blame them for their caution when a child's safety hangs in the balance. That night, Alexander insists she stay in the guest suite near the nursery, a room decorated with understated luxury that makes her modest apartment look like a storage closet. All soft grays and cream linens and furniture that probably costs more than her annual salary. He shows her where everything is located, his manner formal and distant now, like walls have gone back up between them, and he tells her to rest because tomorrow will bring lawyers and paperwork and complications. Eleanor lies awake in the unfamiliar bed, processing the surreal turn her life has taken in less than 24 hours. From her normal shift at the hospital, to holding a stolen baby during a robbery, to standing in a crime lord's mansion, agreeing to stay in his home and care for his nephew. Sleep feels impossible with adrenaline still singing through her veins, an awareness of Alexander somewhere in this vast house, doing the same calculus about whether she can be trusted. She hears Tommy cry sometime after 2 in the morning and rises immediately on instinct, padding barefoot down the hallway to the nursery where soft light already glows. Alexander stands beside the crib, looking down at his wailing nephew with an expression of complete helplessness that transforms him from dangerous to lost in a single moment. The powerful crime lord who commands fear and respect does not know how to soothe a baby. Eleanor steps into the room without announcing herself and moves to his side, lifting Tommy gently and checking his diaper before settling into the rocking chair to comfort him. Alexander watches her hands move with professional competence as she examines the baby for signs of distress, and finding none begins the slow rock and gentle shush that gradually calms his cries. She gestures for Alexander to sit on the ottoman beside her and guides his large hands to the proper position for holding an infant, their fingers brushing and tangling as she adjusts his grip and shows him how to support the head and create the secure pressure that mimics a womb. The air between them crackles with awareness, neither expected, electricity arcing across the small space separating their bodies as they lean close over the baby, and her scent reaches him and his warmth wraps around her. Tommy settles between them with a small sigh, and Eleanor's exhaustion finally shows in the droop of her shoulders and the shadows under her eyes. Alexander sees it and tells her to sleep, his voice rough with something that might be tenderness, and promises he will watch Tommy for what remains of the night. Eleanor hesitates because trusting him feels like jumping off a cliff, but she sees the determination in his eyes and the gentle way he cradles his nephew, and she finds herself believing he would burn the world before letting harm come to this child. Eleanor wakes to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the immediate spike of panic that comes from not knowing where she is for one disorienting heartbeat before memory floods back with crushing weight, the estate and Tommy and Alexander somewhere in this vast house, and she throws off the expensive sheets and rushes barefoot down the hallway without bothering to find her shoes or check her appearance because nothing matters except confirming the baby is safe. The nursery door stands open, and she stops in the threshold as her racing heart does something complicated at the sight before her. Alexander is asleep in the rocking chair with Tommy secure in his arms, the baby's small hand fisted in the man's shirt, and both of them breathing in the slow rhythm of deep sleep. And the image does something to Eleanor that she cannot name, but feels dangerously close to longing for things she has no right to want. The powerful crime lord looks younger in sleep with his hard features softened and his dark hair falling across his forehead, and the gentleness with which he holds his nephew even unconscious speaks to an instinct deeper than his dangerous reputation. Eleanor stands frozen between retreating to give them privacy and stepping closer to check on Tommy when footsteps sound behind her, and she turns to find James watching with an expression that mingles assessment and residual suspicion. He gestures for her to follow him downstairs, and she goes reluctantly, glancing back once at Alexander and Tommy before trailing James to a study lined with books and expensive furniture where he closes the door with quiet finality. James turns to face her with a file folder in his hand, and his jaw set in hard lines as he explains that the background check came back, and Eleanor's stomach clenches because she knows what he found, or rather, what he did not find. Eleanor Whitmore, 28 years old, pediatric nurse at Metro General Hospital for 4 years, decent credit score, modest savings account, no criminal record, no family connections, no red flags, but also no obvious ties to the Lennox family or any criminal organization, which is somehow both reassuring and concerning in its simplicity. James watches her face as he recites the facts of her life like items on an inventory list, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp as broken glass. And then he asks the question that matters most. Why did she help? Eleanor meets his gaze without flinching, even though her pulse hammers, because she has done nothing wrong and will not be made to feel like a criminal for showing basic human decency. She explains in a voice steadier than she feels that her nursing training and every instinct she possesses kicked in when she saw a terrified baby thrust into her arms, that she has spent her career caring for children who cannot protect themselves, that the idea of handing Tommy over to strangers when he was already traumatized felt fundamentally wrong in ways she cannot fully articulate, but knows bone deep. James listens without interrupting, and then asks with deliberate bluntness what she wants in return for her help. Money or protection or leverage over Alexander, and Eleanor's anger flares hot enough to burn through her exhaustion and fear. She takes a step toward James and tells him with steel threading through her words that she wants nothing except the assurance that Tommy will be safe and loved, that not everyone operates from a position of self-interest, that some people still believe children deserve protection without price tags attached. Her fire seems to surprise James, and something shifts in his expression that might be grudging respect as he studies her flushed face and blazing eyes. The moment stretches taut as wire until Alexander's voice cuts through the tension from the doorway, asking what exactly is happening in his study, and both Eleanor and James turn to find him standing there with Tommy awake and content in his arms. The tension in the room shifts immediately as Alexander's gaze moves between his second-in-command and the woman who has somehow become central to his nephew's well-being in less than 48 hours. Alexander asks Eleanor if she is all right, and the concern in his voice surprises her enough that she nods without trusting herself to speak. He turns to James with an expression that demands explanation, and James provides the summary of the background check results and his subsequent questioning, his tone professional, but lacking the edge it held moments before. Alexander listens, and then makes a decision that Eleanor sees form behind his eyes before he speaks. He asks Eleanor directly if she would consider staying on as Tommy's temporary caregiver while custody is legally established and the household adjusts. And he adds that he will compensate her well for her time and expertise. Eleanor's immediate response rises without thought as she refuses payment, but agrees to stay for Tommy's sake because she needs to ensure with her own eyes that he is truly safe and thriving in this environment. Alexander studies her for a long moment, and then accepts her terms with something that might be admiration flickering across his hard features. And Eleanor realizes she has done it again, negotiated with a crime lord, and somehow walked away with exactly what she wanted. And she wonders when she became brave enough or foolish enough to challenge a man who terrifies the entire city. Over the following days, an unexpected rhythm develops in the estate that surprises Eleanor with its naturalness. The way she falls into patterns of care for Tommy that feel less like a job and more like something fundamental shifting in her understanding of what home means. She wakes with the sunrise and goes to the nursery where Tommy greets her with increasingly enthusiastic coos and reaching arms. And she changes him and feeds him and talks to him in the gentle sing-song voice that makes him smile. And Alexander appears without fail by the time she has Tommy dressed for the day, drawn to the nursery like gravity pulls oceans to the moon. He watches her work with professional skill and genuine affection that radiates from every touch and word, and gradually he begins asking questions about feeding schedules and developmental milestones, and how to interpret different cries. His fierce intelligence applied to learning the vocabulary of infant care with the same focus he brings to running his organization. Eleanor teaches him how to test bottle temperature and support Tommy during tummy time and recognize the signs of an impending nap, and their hands brush constantly in the transfer of baby or bottle or blanket, each touch sparking awareness that grows harder to ignore as hours become days. Alexander handles his business in the morning hours, but returns frequently to the nursery throughout the day, and Eleanor finds herself listening for his footsteps and feeling her pulse quicken when he enters a room. And she knows this is dangerous territory, but cannot seem to stop herself from leaning into the gravitational pull between them. Their conversations deepen in the quiet hours after Tommy falls asleep, when Eleanor should retreat to her guest suite, but instead finds herself lingering while Alexander talks about Catherine, his beloved younger sister, who wanted desperately out of the family business, who dreamed of college and a normal life, who fell in love with the wrong man and paid with her life trying to protect her son. The pain in Alexander's voice when he speaks of finding her body, and Tommy missing carves channels through Eleanor's defenses, and she finds herself sharing pieces of her own history she rarely discusses. The childhood spent in foster care, bouncing between homes where she was tolerated but never wanted. The drive to help children that comes from knowing viscerally what it means to be small and powerless and alone. The loneliness she masks with purpose and professional competence. Alexander listens with an intensity that makes her feel seen in ways she has never experienced, and the attraction building between them becomes impossible to ignore as touches linger seconds too long, and eyes hold across rooms and conversations trail into charged silences. But the danger surrounding them remains real and present, like a storm gathering on the horizon, and James reports with increasing frequency that Richard Lennox is making moves and asking questions about the baby through channels that suggest he knows Tommy survived and may know where he is now. Alexander increases security around the estate and assigns additional guards to the nursery wing, and Eleanor realizes with cold clarity that she is in genuine danger now. That staying here makes her a target in a war she barely understands. She should leave for her own safety and let Alexander handle his world without an innocent bystander complicating his strategies. But she cannot abandon Tommy, who reaches for her with complete trust, and she cannot abandon Alexander, though she has no right to claim him or the space she has carved in his dangerous life. One evening, after Tommy falls asleep in his crib, with his small hand wrapped around her finger, Eleanor slips out to the terrace for air and finds her hands shaking with the weight of decisions she knows are coming, and she stands at the railing looking out over the manicured grounds, thinking about safety and belonging, and whether love is worth the price of fear, when Alexander's voice sounds behind her asking if she is all right. And the concern threading through his words nearly breaks her. Eleanor turns from the railing to find Alexander silhouetted against the light spilling from the nursery windows. His expression shadowed, but his posture tense in ways she has learned to read over these days of proximity and growing familiarity. She tells him she is fine, but the lie tastes bitter because she is anything but fine, caught between terror and longing in equal measure. Alexander moves closer and tells her with quiet intensity that she should leave for her own safety, that his world is too dangerous for someone innocent, that he cannot guarantee her protection if Lennox decides she is leverage worth taking. Eleanor's hands grip the terrace railing hard enough to hurt, as anger rises hot and clarifying through her chest because she recognizes what he is doing, pushing her away before he can care too much or fail to protect another person he loves. She turns to face him fully and asks with steel threading through her voice if he truly believes she will abandon Tommy when the boy has already lost his mother and needs stability more than anything, and Alexander's jaw tightens as he argues that Tommy will be fine with him and the staff and James, that Eleanor has done more than enough already. Eleanor takes a step toward him and calls him a coward with enough heat to make his eyes flare wide, and she tells him he is pushing her away because he is afraid of caring for someone again after losing Catherine, afraid of failing Tommy the way he believes he failed his sister, afraid of what he feels for her because admitting it makes her a target and a vulnerability he cannot control. Alexander's control snaps like overstressed wire, and he closes the distance between them in two strides, crowding her back against the terrace rail, with his hands gripping the stone on either side of her body, caging her in without touching, and the heat rolling off him makes her breath catch as he admits through gritted teeth that she terrifies him in ways enemies with guns never have. She makes him want things he cannot have, a normal life without blood and violence, safety for people he loves, the luxury of waking up beside someone without wondering if caring for her will sign her death warrant, and Eleanor's heart hammers against her ribs as she watches his carefully constructed walls crumble to reveal the raw need underneath. She lifts shaking hands to his face and confesses with her voice breaking that she feels it too, this impossible pull toward a man she should fear but does not, cannot, will not, and Alexander makes a sound low in his throat before his mouth crashes onto hers with desperate longing and barely leashed control. Eleanor responds with equal need, her fingers threading through his hair as she kisses him back, with everything she has been holding inside for days, and the kiss is fire and promise and confession, tasting of fear and hope and the terrible timing of falling in love in the middle of a war. His hands move to her waist and then her back, pulling her against him as her world narrows to the heat of his mouth and the solid strength of his body and the way he kisses her like she is oxygen and he has been drowning. The moment stretches infinite until James's urgent voice shatters the bubble they have built, calling Alexander's name with an edge that makes them break apart breathless and disoriented. James stands in the doorway with his phone in hand and his expression grim as he reports they have found the location where Tommy was held and the evidence points to Richard Lennox directly, that sources confirm Lennox is planning another move and they must act now to end the threat permanently. Eleanor watches Alexander transform before her eyes, from the vulnerable man who kissed her like salvation into the dangerous crime lord, whose reputation makes grown men flinch, his expression hardening into cold calculation as he asks James for details and begins issuing orders with clipped precision. Alexander prepares for war with the cold efficiency Eleanor has only glimpsed before. His transformation complete, as he moves through the estate issuing orders in clipped tones that brook no argument or hesitation. He tells Eleanor with absolute command, threading through gentleness, to stay at the estate with extra security positioned around her and Tommy, that James is assigning his 3 best men to the nursery wing with orders to protect them at any cost. Eleanor's terrified, but finds herself trusting him in ways that should frighten her more than they do, trusting that he will do whatever necessary to end this threat and return to them. Before Alexander leaves, he comes to find her in the nursery, where she holds a sleeping Tommy and simply looks at them for a long moment, as if memorizing the image. Then he crosses to her and cups her face with hands that are gentle despite their capability for violence, and promises with fierce intensity to come back to them, the possessive plural not lost on Eleanor, as her heart clenches painfully. She wants to beg him to stay or take more men or be careful, but knows none of those words will change what must happen, so instead she turns her face into his palm and whispers for him to end this, so they can finally be safe. Alexander's thumb brushes her cheekbone before he leans down to press a kiss to her forehead, and then he is gone, taking James and half the security force with him and leaving Eleanor alone with Tommy and the terrible waiting. Hours pass in agonizing slowness that makes every minute feel like 10 as Eleanor distracts herself with Tommy's care, changing him and feeding him and singing soft lullabies that sound shaky with fear she cannot fully suppress. Sarah calls just after 10, her voice frantic as she demands to know if Eleanor has seen the news about increased police activity and rumors spreading through certain channels about a mob conflict brewing in the warehouse district. Eleanor cannot explain everything over the phone, but assures her friend with more confidence than she feels that she is safe and will call again when she can. Just after midnight, when Tommy finally falls into restless sleep in his crib, gunshots sound in the distance, muffled by walls and distance but unmistakable, and Eleanor's blood freezes to ice in her veins as her worst fears crystallize into terrible possibility. She gathers Tommy with shaking hands and follows the emergency protocols James taught her 2 days ago, moving quickly through the hallway to the secure panic room hidden behind what looks like a linen closet. And security guards rush past her with weapons drawn and grim expressions. Then silence falls heavy and oppressive, broken only by Tommy's whimpering against her shoulder and her own hammering heartbeat loud in her ears. Footsteps approach the panic room, and Eleanor holds Tommy tight with one arm while her other hand hovers over the emergency alert button, her heart threatening to break through her ribs as the door handle turns. The door opens, and Alexander stands there, backlit by hallway lights, with blood streaking his white shirt, and a cut above his eyebrow, but alive and whole, and looking at her with such raw relief that her knees nearly buckle. Relief crashes through Eleanor so powerfully she sways and makes a sound between a sob and his name, and Alexander reaches for her with urgent need, and she goes into his arms without hesitation, Tommy secure between them as the 3 of them hold tight enough to hurt in the desperate affirmation of survival and presence, and the terror finally passed. In the aftermath, Eleanor stands beside Alexander in his study, while dawn light filters through heavy curtains and turns the bloodstains on his discarded shirt from crimson to rust. And he explains with carefully controlled tone that Richard Lennox is no longer a threat, without elaborating on what that means in concrete terms. Eleanor does not ask for details because she understands with sudden clarity that some knowledge cannot be unknown, and some truths are better left unspoken if she wants to sleep at night. Understanding instead that the danger which has hung over them, like a blade suspended on fraying thread, has finally been cut away. Alexander tells her the legal paperwork establishing his custody of Tommy is now uncontested, and will be finalized within days, that she is free to return to her life and her apartment and her nursing shifts without fear of retaliation or complications. Eleanor nods because what else can she do when her temporary purpose has been completed, and Tommy is safe with his uncle and the threat eliminated and her presence no longer necessary in any practical sense. For 2 days, they circle each other like wary strangers, despite everything that has passed between them, both knowing a decision must be made, but neither willing to speak the words that will shatter the fragile bubble they have built. Eleanor cares for Tommy with the same gentle devotion, but now every touch feels like goodbye, and every smile from the baby breaks her heart a little more, because she knows she is leaving, and he will not understand why. She packs her small bag with hands that tremble and tells herself this is for the best, that she cannot stay in Alexander's dangerous world without a defined role, that loving him is not enough reason to upend her entire life. When she goes to the nursery to say goodbye to Tommy, her tears stream unchecked as she holds him close and breathes in his baby scent and promises him he will be loved and safe and cared for by his uncle who would burn the world down to protect him. Tommy grasps her finger with his tiny hand and coos at her with complete trust, and Eleanor nearly loses her resolve entirely before she forces herself to lay him gently in his crib and walk away before she cannot. She finds Alexander in his study, standing at the window with his back to her and shoulders rigid with tension he is trying to conceal, and she tells him with voice barely steady that she is leaving now, but needed to say goodbye properly, rather than simply disappearing. Alexander turns and crosses to her with measured steps and asks with deceptive calm if she wants to leave, and Eleanor feels something crack open in her chest as she admits with brutal honesty that she does not want to leave, but cannot stay in his world without truly belonging, without a place that is hers rather than borrowed. Alexander stops an arm's length away and tells her with quiet intensity that she already belongs, to Tommy, who lights up when she enters a room and fusses when she is gone too long, and to him who has not felt this powerfully alive since before Catherine died, and the weight of grief became his constant companion. Alexander drops every last wall around his heart completely and tells Eleanor with raw vulnerability that he has never asked anyone to stay before in his entire life, never wanted someone woven so thoroughly into the fabric of his existence that their absence would unravel him. But he is asking now with everything he has left to offer. Not as Tommy's caregiver or temporary guardian, but as his partner in every sense that matters. His equal in building the life they will create together. The woman he is falling in love with more deeply with every passing moment they share. He cannot promise her safety, because his world will always carry shadows and threats that lurk in corners she never knew existed. But he can promise absolute devotion that will never waver, protection that extends to his last breath, and a family they will build together around Tommy, who needs them both with desperate completeness. Eleanor's hands shake so violently she has to clasp them together as she processes words that remake her entire understanding of what her future could hold. And she admits with voice breaking on the edges of tears that she is terrified of his dangerous world with its violence and moral complexity. But she is infinitely more terrified of walking away from him and spending the rest of her life wondering what could have been. She loves him, despite the absolute impossibility of their circumstances, loves him for his fierce protectiveness and hidden gentleness, and the way grief has carved compassion into his hardness. And she loves Tommy as if he were her own flesh and blood, rather than a stranger's baby thrust into her arms during chaos. Alexander closes the remaining distance between them and kisses her with reverent possession that speaks of claiming and cherishing in equal measure, his hands framing her face with a tenderness that contradicts everything his reputation suggests, and Eleanor kisses him back with her decision made and her future chosen as she trades safety and loneliness for danger and love, and the terrifying beauty of true belonging. Months later, Eleanor stands in the nursery, that has become truly her home rather than borrowed space. Watching Alexander play with Tommy on the plush carpet while late afternoon sunlight streams through windows overlooking manicured grounds. And Tommy at 9 months old is thriving and happy with bright eyes and delighted laughter. The legal adoption papers making her officially and permanently Tommy's mother in every way that matters lie signed and notarized on the dresser beside a framed photo of Catherine that Eleanor talks to sometimes when she rocks Tommy to sleep. Sarah visits regularly now, her initial shock transformed into genuine happiness at seeing Eleanor so completely settled and loved, and James has evolved from suspicious guardian into protective friend who brings Tommy ridiculously expensive toys and teaches Eleanor which families in the organization need medical help but distrust hospitals. Eleanor's nursing skills have found new purpose caring for those who exist in Alexander's world, and she has discovered that family is not defined by blood or convention, but by the fierce choice to stay when leaving would be easier. Alexander wraps his arms around her from behind and pulls her back against his chest, his chin resting on her shoulder as they watch Tommy grab for his stuffed bear. And Eleanor leans into him with overwhelming gratitude that she held a stranger's baby during a robbery that terrible day and let it lead her here through fear and danger and impossible choices to this moment of perfect belonging, to love that remade them both, to home.